Montreal is sort of ground zero for my entrepreneurial career.
My people.
Your family.
This is, first of all, you know where I work, right? Across the street. It took me like 30 seconds to get here. But Montreal, entrepreneurs, that's a Venn diagram of my life. Thank you all for being here.
Harley, thank you for accepting to be part of North Star. It's safe to say this event would have not been possible if it weren't for you accepting. The reason we put this event together is really to highlight the great entrepreneurs of Montreal and Canada. And the room is filled, like I said, with friendly faces, really students and founders.
Show of hands, how many of you are entrepreneurs in the room? Wow, pretty much everybody. Great.
So I just want to express our deepest gratitude.
Please.
So maybe just a quick thank you for Harley.
It is interesting to be here because my very first business, I started in a place called Dollar Des Ormeaux. Do you guys know where that is? So I was 13 years old. Some of you know the story. I started a DJ company in Dollar Des Ormeaux. My second business, I started in Chabanel, the Montreal Garment District, when I was 17 years old. And then I did a bunch of other stuff that didn't work out as well. And then obviously Shopify we're doing okay.
Okay.
It's okay. But Montreal is ground zero for my entrepreneurial career. And actually, even more importantly, about 10 kilometers from here is the Jean Talon Farmers Market. And that is where my family's entrepreneurial story and life started. My grandfather in the 60s started a little egg stall called Le Capitaine at the Jean Talon Farmers Market. If any of you shop there, Le Capitaine is still there to this day. My family still operates it. And it's not just, yes, it's convenient for me to walk across the street from Shopify to Asher and be here, but more importantly, this is the epicenter. This is the ground zero, and this is the start of everything that I've done from an entrepreneurial perspective. And of course, the fact that we're trying to make Shopify the entrepreneurship company, it all feels kind of full circle. Yeah.
Feels like you're back home. You started answering my first question, even without me even asking it. How...
I can just do this on my own if you want.
Yeah. Honestly, I think I'm going to get off the stage. You left a quote-unquote potentially stable career, and you followed, like you said, multiple businesses. What's the advice you give to people that are wrestling with this? I want to be an entrepreneur, but at the same time, I'm grappling with this decision today. I imagine you get this question a lot.
I think there are two types of entrepreneurs in the world. There are the entrepreneurs that do so out of passion, and there are these entrepreneurs that do so out of necessity. My grandfather did not have any passion towards eggs. I never said that out loud before. But it's true. He didn't care about eggs. He wasn't interested in the different types of eggs. Are they goose eggs or duck eggs or chicken? He didn't care about that. He cared about one thing, which was survival. Show of hands, how many of you, either you or your parents, are immigrants? Okay, so my dad's an immigrant. My dad came here in '56 in the Hungarian Revolution. And when they got here, my grandparents had no choice. They couldn't go get a job at Shopify or whatever the Shopify of the day was. They couldn't study. They didn't have any money. They didn't speak the language. They didn't have any real skill set in which to transfer into employment. So fundamentally, entrepreneurship for so many of us and for our parents was about survival. And that's the greatest part about entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurship doesn't care about what your last name is. It doesn't care about, who your parents are. It doesn't care about what school you went to. It cares about value creation. And for my grandfather, that value creation equation or transaction was about, I'm going to give you eggs, you're going to give me money. And it allowed him to put a roof over my father's head and put food on the table. I mentioned the DJ company, but what you may not know is I didn't want to start a DJ company. I just wanted to be a DJ. And that I thought was the coolest job in the world. I was 13. I was going to these bar mitzvahs every weekend. The DJs seemed like magicians to me. They were so cool. But I looked like I was 8 years old when I was 13, and I didn't know how to DJ. And so instead of hiring me, which wasn't going to happen, I ended up starting my own company and hiring myself. So my grandfather did so out of necessity. I did so out of passion. But in both cases, entrepreneurship was the tool we took out of our toolbox to fix the problem. And when I meet aspiring entrepreneurs, North Star talks about inspiring, but people that are considering entrepreneurship, the first thing that I say to them is, why are you doing it? And if it's passion or it's necessity, those are both incredible reasons to do. I do also think that there is the math around entrepreneurship has changed. And what I mean by that is, if you look back 50 years ago, 500 years ago, 5 years ago even to some extent, the cost of failure, if you start a business and it fails, was very high. If my grandfather, if Le Capitaine at the Jean Talon Farmers Market was a failure, fundamentally their life would have changed in a very bad way. Today, if you start a business, this is not a pitch for Shopify, but let's say you start a business on Shopify, it is $39. $39, couple Starbucks coffees. And that business might become a multi-billion-dollar company inside of a decade. That was impossible for my grandparents, for my parents, and for generations before us. But for us, because we can do it, it means that if you have an idea in the shower and it comes up more than 3 or 4 times, you probably should do something about it. Because you can build something that is so generational, so meaningful, so important that it might change the world. Last week was NRF, National Retail Federation. It's the prom for retail. It's in New York City, and I'm on the board of NRF. And they invited me to give the keynote. So I gave my sort of keynote about the future of retail and commerce. And then I brought 2 guests on stage with me. The first guest I brought on stage with me was Kat Cole. Kat Cole is the CEO of AG1. Show of hands, how many of AG1 or take AG1? Right, me too, it's great. Okay, AG1 was started in 2014. 2014. Last year, it did $600 million with one single SKU. One SKU did $600 million. I also brought Sarah Foster on stage with me. Sarah Foster she's an entrepreneur. She has a clothing company called Favorite Daughter. She also is the producer of a show on Netflix called Nobody Wants This. That company was started 4 years ago. That company is doing tens of millions of dollars. This velocity of growth and success has never been seen in entrepreneurship ever because technology empowers that. So on one side, you have the cost of failure is getting as low as it's ever been. And on the other side, you have an unlimited ceiling where you can build massive companies in very few years. And that's why I think it behooves you to start a business if you keep thinking about an idea.
I want to double click on, you speak about the how, maybe a little bit on the why, where you mentioned passion, intensity. I want to read a quote from a recent interview you did with Yuri Levine on the Big Shot podcast, which everyone should check out. He started a small company called Waze. People have heard of it. I want to read you the quote. So the simplest
100 million monthly actives on Waze, still 100 million, unbelievable.
The simplest way to create value is to solve a problem. The problem is going to serve as the North Star of your journey. And when you have a North Star, you're going to make less deviation from the course and increase the likelihood of being successful. I love that quote for obvious reasons. You mentioned multiple businesses. How did you come upon, because you incarnate, clearly you feel the energy of empowering entrepreneurs. Talk to us about that path. How did you connect with that mission?
I mentioned that, yeah. Let me talk about Montreal for a second, if that's okay. I moved back to Montreal 18 months ago, and I'm just going to say it, this isn't surprising, but I can live anywhere in the world now that I want. And I can live really well anywhere in the world. I say that not as a flex, but because I didn't grow up like that. I come up from very humble beginnings. And the fact that I had the opportunity and the choice to live anywhere, and I decided on Montreal, for me is obvious. For Elise, it's probably obvious too. Famous entrepreneur Elise Tayset is in the room. But truly, I can live anywhere, and I chose to live in Montreal. And ironically, everyone that I told outside of Montreal that I was moving here, they're like, yeah, Montreal is incredible. But a lot of people that I told that I was moving to Montreal that live in Montreal asked me why. It's like this weird self-deprecating thing that we do to ourselves, and I don't know why. The reason is, I actually believe Montreal is the most entrepreneurial city on the planet. And the reason is, it's true. By the way, we need to own that. We need to own that brand. Everyone that I talk to, meet with, hang out with, everyone's an entrepreneur here. You meet chefs, you meet people like Lisa's friends like Vanya or Danny Smiles. They're entrepreneurs. You meet the old guard, people like Aldo Bensadoun or Jonathan Wiener or Charles Bronfman. They're entrepreneurs. You talk to people in retail, Sal Parasuco or David Bitton from Buffalo Jeans. Montreal is so full of entrepreneurs. We should own that we are entrepreneur city. Because I think part of the reason that's like that is because we are an immigrant city, and for a lot of us, we had no choice, and so we got resourceful, and we got creative, and we've built global companies right from this little island that we call home. Okay, so you asked about why do I care about the mission. I care about the mission for the same reason I moved back to Montreal, because I think ultimately entrepreneurs are the problem solvers. There are people that look at a problem and say, I'm going to make a spreadsheet, or I'm going to create a PowerPoint deck, and I'm going to explore, and I'm going to... But entrepreneurs, they just get shit done. They see a problem and an opportunity, and they solve it. Now, not all opportunities are going to be incredibly inspiring. The t-shirt business that I started at McGill in 2001 was built because my father was not around anymore. I had 2 younger sisters that needed to be supported, and my mother, and I needed to make money. And so I looked around, and it turned out that McGill University, where I was going to school at the time, was spending a lot of money on promotional T-shirts. And I knew that Montreal had a storied apparel industry, what we call the schmutta business, that 10 blocks from McGill was this place where there were screen printing machines, and there was this crazy guy named Dov Charney who was starting American Apparel, and you had Gildan was based in Montreal, and you had all these crazy companies. I was like, all right, I'm going to connect the dots. These people need T-shirts. There's all these T-shirts here. I'm just going to build a T-shirt business. That is what I think entrepreneurs do. They see opportunity in every single aspect of life. And I think that the reason that this is my 16th year at Shopify. I'm 41 years old, so I've spent more than a third of my life helping to build this incredible company. And the reason that I chose Shopify to do my life's work is because it is the culmination of everything I care about. It is the company that creates the most amount of entrepreneurs, the most surface area and opportunity for entrepreneurs, and I don't think there's any better way for me to spend my time than to create more of that. And whether you say it's a software company or you say it's an ambition company, ultimately what Shopify's core purpose is to turn someone's idea into a business. Not all business will succeed, but a lot of them will succeed. And I think that is why it is important to have a personal mission. But I also think if you can somehow marry your personal mission to your professional mission, that Venn diagram overlap, that is the definition of life's work. And if you can find your life's work early in your life, you win. And I think more entrepreneurs are winning because they're able to find that than those that are not entrepreneurs. And it doesn't mean you all should, those students in the room, I'm not saying drop out, stay in school if that's what you want to do. What I am saying, however, is that if there is something gnawing at you that you're thinking could be something bigger, go and do that.
Yeah. You're a fan of Ikigai, so I read a lot about what you just said in that. I was going to talk about failure, but I think I'm going to switch gears a bit, Harley, and talk to you about, you mentioned Montreal, and I think everyone in the room is super grateful that you decided to come back home.
Best decision I've ever made. I'm celebrating my 18-month anniversary. Elise was my tour guide when I came. She showed me every crazy, amazing restaurant. This place is wild. There is culture. There is energy. It's cold as hell, right? Some of you know this, but I lived here until I was 13, and then I moved to South Florida. And I decided to come back here to go to McGill, and I ended up staying here. So I love every aspect about this crazy city. I got a chance to have lunch today with the CEO of the airport, of the Montreal airport. Even the CEO of the airport is ambitious. Do you know that when I asked him, true story, this happened literally 2 hours ago. I'm sure there's issues, or all of you to complain about the lines, whatever. When I asked him, very simply, who are you trying to emulate? Who do you want to compete with from an airport perspective? I expected he'd say Pearson, or I don't know, Calgary or Vancouver. He said London. He said Heathrow. He is trying to build an airport that is more functional, more practical, and more ambitious than Heathrow. I love that. That is such a Montreal thing. Now, it's going to take a while to get there, I suspect, right? But I love that ambition, and I don't remember what you asked.
I did ask a question, but it's okay. So I like the optimism right now. Maybe we'll put it on the slide. There's a recent report from Globe that showed entrepreneurship is at an all-time low. At least in the past 20 years, there's been a decline in the number of people that identify as entrepreneurs, which is a little bit of a disappointing statistic.
That's the most pathetic thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah.
And you've been a long time an advocate and pushed Canadians to think bolder, to think bigger, to be more ambitious. Rightfully. So what's the practical advice that you give, let's say, entrepreneurs in the room to take on that mantle?
A couple of things. First of all, you're missing, this slide is dated by about 6 months. There actually has been a reversal in this trend, true story. So that is already happening. But yes, I do believe that this is a bad trend, and I think we all should be highly concerned about it. But on the Canada side of things, and I'm sure Ian has heard me say this, I'm sure some of you heard me say this before, but on stage in Toronto 6 months ago, I did a talk with my friend Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, and I had this flex, and I can do that now. It's one of the great perks of my life. I work really hard for that. I work 90 hours a week so I can say stuff like that. But I said on stage that I wanted to address the 600-pound beaver in the room. And what I meant by that was the lack of ambition in Canada and from Canadian entrepreneurs. And boy, did I get criticized. I think there were like 8 articles the next day saying that I don't know what I'm talking about and how dare I and all these things. And the criticism of that particular statement was based on the fact that there are societal issues in Canada. There are infrastructure, lack of infrastructure, that there's too much regulation, that it's not the fault of Canadians that we're not ambitious, but rather, as a country, we do not make it easy. There's too much friction to create large-scale companies. Let me be really clear about this. There is always going to be friction. There's always going to be barriers to entry. There's always going to be barriers to scale. There's not going to go try to register a domain name. It's still difficult. It's 2025, and buying a domain name or configuring a specific top-level domain email address is still difficult. My point, however, is that despite all the friction, I want us to be a country of acquirers, not acquirees. And I'm always proud when there are companies that do get acquired in Canada. They make money. They become angel investors. Those things are all good. But the problem with that is it's a slippery slope. And eventually, if every one of our great Canadian companies ends up getting acquired, we become a country of branch offices. And we don't deserve to be a country of branch offices. We should be a country of HQs. We should be the acquirers. And so what I've started to do now is when I'm mentoring or coaching a great entrepreneur or a startup, maybe it's a company that I've invested in personally, or maybe it's just someone I admire, and they start talking about a potential Google is interested in acquiring us. I often say, have you ever thought about acquiring Google? And I'm not joking. And I know that Google is a $1 trillion company, and the likelihood of this company acquiring Google is very low. But it's a certain mindset shift, which is that we can build large-scale independent businesses. Shopify went public May 24th, 2015. When we went public, we had about $1 billion market cap. That is a very small market cap for an IPO. Most IPOs, if you look at the average IPO market cap, are much higher than that. We did a dual listing in the US and Canada, New York Stock Exchange and TSX. On an average basis, we are well below the threshold of the size of company that should go public. But the reason we did that was because we felt that was the surest way for us to stay independent. That we can get bigger faster with more capital, and the public markets give us access to more capital. And so we did that, and now there's probably, 10 companies on the planet, maybe 5, who can actually afford to acquire Shopify. What does that mean? It means that we can stay independent for a very long time. And I want more companies in Canada to think about building these generational companies from right here and being the acquirer, not the acquiree. So I'm sure I'm going to have some article written tomorrow about how I said something silly there. I'm not saying that it's the most perfect environment for entrepreneurs in Canada. What I'm saying is, who fucking cares? Instead of worrying about having the most perfect environment, worry about building the most perfect product and business model and the best team ever. And I think if we do that, we will have more of these happen. You talked about entrepreneurship at an early stage earlier before. The number one, if you look at entrepreneurs in the world and you ask them about inspiration, about who inspired them to become entrepreneurs, it's actually fairly remarkable. If you know an entrepreneur growing up in your family, in your close circle, as a neighbor, you are 10 times more likely to be an entrepreneur yourself. That also works in terms of ambition. If you know someone who's built a large-scale company, an independent company, you yourself are a lot more likely to build a very large company. And I think the more of those that we have, the more role models we have in Canada, we will create this beautiful, virtuous flywheel of growth and HQs. And I think that's how we win.
Success brings success. Maybe to talk about the other gorilla in the room, our big American neighbors.
I said beaver, but you can say gorilla.
Our neighbors to the south. There's been this trend of a lot of founders saying, why even bother building in Canada? And I think your retort is, it doesn't effing matter. You should build here. What do you tell founders that are considering this? Oh, I'm going to start in the US, or there's no funding here. How do you think about, famously, obviously Shopify raised from US VCs, right? So curious to think about that for a founder.
I think it's a great question. I think that right now, and I think even when we were starting to build Shopify, we were somewhat geographically agnostic. It didn't really matter who our customers were. In fact, if you look at the growth of Shopify, the largest consumer base we had in the early days was the US. SMEs in the US was our major hub. We were building this product for American small businesses from a little office above a buffet restaurant in Ottawa, Canada. I say that because I don't think that the geography matters nearly as much as it once did. I think all of you and all of us should be completely geographically agnostic when it comes to who we sell to, who we raise from, and every aspect, even in terms of who we hire. We never really looked to be the greatest commerce or retail company in Canada. We wanted to be the greatest commerce company, full stop. We just happened to building it from Canada because, notwithstanding, and I think I can speak objectively and honestly about this because I've lived in both countries, I want to live in Canada. I think Canada is objectively the greatest country to live in. I want my kids to grow up here. I want my life to be here. But I don't consider Shopify a Canadian company. I consider us a company that happens to be based in Canada. So, if you look at our Series A, it was led by Bessemer, follow on from Felicis and FirstMark. Series B, I think we had Georgian as our first Canadian VC, but we also had follow-ons from American VCs. If you look at the IPO, most of the people that filled up the book in the IPO were American investors. Today, I don't know the exact number, but the vast majority of our float, meaning the stocks that trade on both exchanges, on the TSX and New York Stock Exchange, most of our stock trades on the New York Stock Exchange, not on the TSX. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm willing to bet that most people, not the big funds, but most retail investors that own Shopify stock around the world have no idea that we're based in Canada, nor should they care. Because today, the internet is geographically agnostic, entrepreneurship is geographically agnostic, especially if you're running software companies, it shouldn't make a difference. So I appreciate and I'm empathetic that this environment, and particularly the fundraising environment, is maybe more challenging. But there are 350 million people there, and there are 40 million people here. As a percentage of the total population, it seems to me that we, on a per cap basis, we got a lot of angel investors here. We have really good VCs here, but I don't think it should matter. I think you should go and find the best VC for your business. Just like when you are finding our original CFO, Russ Jones, an amazing man. After the IPO, he retired. He told us he's going to take the company public with us, and then he was in his 60s, he was going to retire. The next CFOs we've had were both American CFOs. Why? Because objectively, they were the right CFOs for Shopify. We weren't looking for an American one, nor were we looking for a Canadian one. We were just looking for the best talent possible. And if you look at the Shopify executive team today, I'm here, Toby's in Toronto, Jeff Hoffmeitzer, our CFO, is in New York, Jess Hertz, our GC, is in DC, Mikhail, our new CTO, is in Seattle. We are geographically agnostic at our core, and also most of the merchants on Shopify. If you look at Viore, you look at Alo Yoga, you look at Gymshark, you look at On Running. These are also geographic agnostic companies. So I would say that if you can, and I believe it to be true, live wherever you want to live. I think Canada and Montreal is a great place to live, but build a global company. Yeah.
Personal question.
That wasn't personal?
Yep.
Okay. Now we're going to get personal.
By many objective metrics, Shopify is a huge success, right? So, we'll show up the stats, but like 195 billion market cap, I think 197 this morning.
You just rounded down by $2 billion.
1 out of 6 internet users bought online last year.
Yeah, 850 million consumers bought off a Shopify store in 2024.
And millions of people, millions of entrepreneurs get to start on Shopify. So there's the public accolades, which are well-deserved. How do you define success for yourself?
Harley, personally? That's hard. I mentioned the concept of life's work earlier on, and I put it up there. That's great. I like having an impact in everything that I do. I am, like many entrepreneurs, many of you in the room, I'm pretty type A. I'm pretty ambitious about everything that I do. I want to be as good of a father as I am as the president of a large company. I want to be as good of a husband as I am a DJ. I'm not a good DJ, but I love to DJ. But there's this concept that I really love, which is the concept of requalification. This is a little weird, but follow me for a second. There are these things called the laws of ecology. And I believe Law 2 of ecology says that for any species to survive in any environment, that species needs to grow and evolve at an equal or greater rate of change than the environment itself, otherwise the species dies. I actually think that's a great way to think about growth and success. If Shopify is growing at a 20%, let's just say a 20% top-line revenue growth year on year, I actually believe in order for me to requalify to be Shopify's president this year and next year and the year after, I have to grow faster than Shopify is growing, and that is really difficult. And one of the things that I think a lot of us do in the early stages of business creation and entrepreneurial ventures is we're all jack of all trades. Because like the t-shirt business, we made t-shirts for, a lot of universities. But I didn't really have a team. I was like the janitor, and I was the CEO, and I was the receptionist, and I was the production manager, and you do a lot of jobs. One of the things that is wonderful about scale is that leaders really get to specialize. And what that's allowed us to do inside of Shopify is that there is no better, in my view, better product visionary on the planet than Toby. Toby is the smartest human I've ever met, and I don't think there's anyone on the planet, maybe Zuck is up there too. Zuck's really amazing at product, but that's how good I think Toby is at product. And for a long time, when we were growing, we had to do all these different things. And one of the things we've been able to do in the last couple of years is rather than be well-rounded, is to figure out what is our point, and then sharpen that point, sharpen that edge. What happens at a lot of companies is that you start with the edge, and then like a river stone, you eventually get well-rounded. But we've been able to re-import that idea of being sharp, pointy objects inside of Shopify and have a really good understanding of what each of our points are. And my sharp point is storytelling. It's what I love doing. It's what I think I can add the most value to Shopify. Sometimes it's storytelling like this. Other times it's on CNBC, or it's on a big stage, or it's on an investor call, or it's to our team doing a town hall. So the way that I gauge success internally at Shopify is really about, am I becoming better at my craft at an equal to or greater pace than Shopify's growth? And it's not a completely scientific measure, but generally, you and your peers, and in my case, the executive team and Shopify's board and our investor base, they give you indications. They give you signal back to say, yeah, this is going really well, or hey, we don't think you're doing well in this particular area. And I think that it is a wonderful gift of life when you can actually find that thing, that point that you love, and get to work on it. Especially if you get to work on it with a team of people who are equally passionate, focused, obsessive about their own points. And when you put all those things together, when you put people that really want to be the best in the world at their things, you get to build these incredible companies. On the personal side, I've said this publicly before, it's tough to gauge whether or not I'm a good father. I ask my daughters, they're 5 and 8, and they say, I'm a great dad, but what do they know? Or maybe I ask my wife if I'm a good husband, and she'll give me some real feedback. But I think you have to pick the spots you want to do. I don't think you can be everything to everyone. I think you have to ultimately pick 3 or 4 things that are deeply meaningful for you. And I think you can create your own informal board of directors. The way that I met today the CEO of the Montreal airport was a mentor of mine, Kalen Ravinescu, who's the CEO of Air Canada, introduced me to him. Why was Kalen a mentor to me? Air Canada and Shopify have nothing in common. What you don't know is that Kalen Ravinescu has one of the greatest relationships with his children of anyone I've ever met. He's an incredible father, and I've watched him with his kids for many years. And I may not take a lot from him in terms of how to run a highly regulated industry company, but I've taken a lot from him in that. And the cool part about all of you in the room here is you can create your own informal board of directors. And it doesn't have to be one person. You can have a mentor for business, and you can have a mentor for being a good dad or a good parent. You can have a good mentor for being a good spouse. You can have a good mentor for being a good DJ. And you can create your own informal board of directors. And I think often that's one of the ways you're able to gauge success, which is like in light or in reflection of the people that you admire, how are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah, very good point, Harley. I want to maybe read a quote from that it really struck me very recently. Entrepreneurship is the greatest tool to self-actualize, to solve a problem, to find success, and to find ourselves. Be curious, what have you learned about yourself over the course of your entrepreneurial journey?
I've had anxiety most of my life. I've had anxiety since I was a kid. You can ask my teachers. I couldn't sit still. I still can barely sit still. I, for a long time, feared this weakness or this vulnerability, that if you show vulnerability, you effectively show weakness. And for any of you that have immigrant parents like I do, they don't often show a lot of vulnerability. At least my Eastern European father does not, and my Eastern European grandparents do not. They're tough, right? They came from nothing, and like they came on a boat from Hungary in the revolution, and they were Holocaust survivors. And so I grew up in an environment where you put on a bit of a bravado facade. And my wife comes from a much more nurturing home. My wife's a psychotherapist. She's incredibly kind and very sweet. And she talks about the things that she's feeling. And she talks about her vulnerabilities and what's going on, what's not. And I don't think it took me a long time in my career and my life to realize that actually the more I talk about anxiety, for example, the more it invites people in to say, oh, I have anxiety too. What have you done that has been helpful? What have you done that's been helpful? Oh, let's actually share tips. Let's actually engage in, like, I can show you something that's really worked well. Meditation's really cool. I've tried hypnotherapy. That's cool too. So that's one of the things, that actually vulnerability in many ways can actually show strength. That's the first thing. The second thing is a lot of the things that we all determine to be deficiencies in our lives, in our personalities, something in our firmware that doesn't work well, that can actually be a total superpower. So I mentioned anxiety before. One of the times I become most anxious is when, I'll give you an example, earnings calls. Usually most earnings calls, we've done, it's almost our 10-year anniversary since the IPO, most earnings calls, we've done 40 now. I have to memorize a lot of metrics of the company. I have to basically know, how is our payments business in Europe doing? How is Shopify Capital doing in New Zealand? Because these are the type of questions you can get, and you don't really have time to sift through notes. You need to know your shit. And what I found, what I only recognized more recently that I don't think I appreciated earlier on, is that actually that's where the anxiety really helps. Because it forces me the night before, laying in bed, to go over laying in bed, like looking at the ceiling, go through every one of those key metrics, going through every one of those narratives and story arcs. And what do you think they're going to ask about this? Or where's that going to lead them to? So rather than look at the anxiety as something that is debilitating or something that is a weight on my boot dragging me down, I think it actually allows me to be way more effective at my job, because I don't want to screw this up. There are 9,000 people or 8,000 people or how many people at Shopify that depend on me. There are millions of merchants at Shopify that depend on me. And there are investors that have given us their money. Forget the big funds. Individual retail investors that have put their life savings into Shopify. And I feel every one of those pieces and units of responsibility, and it drives me to get really prepared. And I think as many of you, especially people in the room that are younger in their careers, and you think about the things that you're trying to adjust or remove, I actually think a much better way is to figure out how do you turn that into something that actually can be very valuable to you. And for Toby, who's so cerebral, who's quite introverted, writing code was the thing that gave him great peace. He loved writing code as a kid. He loved writing code as he didn't finish school, and writing code and developing software was this great pastime for him. He turned that pastime into a $100 billion plus company. And that code writing that gave him that exit when he didn't want to be around people because he's introverted and he wants to relax, that has allowed him to be one of the most, in my view, one of the most legendary entrepreneurs ever. So I think that's a very long answer to a very short question.
I have a short question next, but take your time. Do you think about legacy at all?
No, I think that's something you think about later in your life. I think, I'm legacy. Maybe one day I will do that. Maybe like when I think of legacy, I think about what is the thing that you leave. You mentioned Big Shot. I don't know if anybody Big Shot, but I have this hobby project on the weekends where I'm creating this archive of the world's greatest Jewish entrepreneurs of the last 50 years. People like Izzy Sharp, who created the Four Seasons. People like Jonathan Weiner from Canderel, or people like Larry Silverstein, Bobby Brown, Mickey Drexler, who built The Gap, was the founder of Old Navy. Sneak peek just for this crowd, our next interview is going to be this woman, Linda Resnick. She created Fiji Water. Amazing lady, 85 years old. Brilliant, probably the greatest marketer, consumer packaged good marketer I've ever met in my life. She created that. She created pomegranate juice. She literally created the category of pomegranate juice. Amazing person. When I do these interviews, and this project is not commercial, there's no sponsors or anything, it's just something I really love doing. When you speak to these people in their 80s and 90s, Izzy Sharp created the Four Seasons, 93 years old, amazing man. When you talk to them about legacy, you talk to them about, especially someone like Izzy, who created the Four Seasons hotel chain. The Four Seasons also didn't just create this beautiful luxury hotel, it actually redefined the business model of hotels. I'm not sure if you know this, but the Four Seasons doesn't own any actual hotels. The Four Seasons owns the management companies. The people that work in a Four Seasons, they work for Four Seasons. But the actual building is owned privately. So in Montreal, for example, Andrew Lutfi owns the Four Seasons. Every one of them is owned by someone different. So they control the luxury experience you get. So brilliant man. And I asked him about legacy and what he's going to leave in the world. And he was also the founder of the Terry Fox Run. And you know what all these people say? These billionaire 90-year-olds, 80-year-olds, when you talk about legacy, they all talk about their families. Every one of them. Izzy talked about his relationship with Rosalie, his wife, and how they've been married for 65 years, and how she was the secret ingredient to the success of the Four Seasons chain. There's a man named Larry Silverstein, who's one of the greatest real estate developers in the history of the U.S. He's the guy they say built New York City. He owned the Twin Towers. He now owns the World Trade Center. And when you talk about legacy to him, he says, you should go talk to my wife. She's the reason that all this happened. So actually, here's an interesting story. So Bobby Brown from Cosmetics. Bobby Brown sold Bobby Brown Cosmetics to Estee Lauder in 1994. And they gave her a 25-year non-compete. 25 years. She put the non-compete end date on a necklace and wore it for 25 years. That end date was a year and a half ago. The next day, she went to her son Cody, and they started Jones Road Beauty. Jones Road Beauty is now one of the most important cosmetics industries in the world. She took everything she learned from building this iconic brand and decided she wanted to go do this with her son. I don't think about legacy a lot, but if I had to glean from all these really amazing people what legacy is all about, it definitely has something to do with the people you spend your time with. And whether that's your business partners or your life partner, it feels more and more that's probably where it's going to get to, but I'm just getting started. There's no legacy yet.
Yeah. So cheers to the next 16 years at Shopify. God damn it, Harley. I feel like we could probably talk for another hours on end, but I realize we don't have a lot of time. This room today, as we mentioned, we were very careful to try and curate to have students and founders really almost exclusively. So really final question would be any final words of wisdom, on entrepreneurship. One thing that comes to mind, and we could probably do a few question 1A and 1B, is this notion of grit. And you're someone that has bounced back, continues to bounce back, and comes back even stronger. So yeah, just curious to hear you riff on what it takes, if you're talking to a young founder today, what it takes to have success.
I fell into the trap on the stage talking to you today that I'm going to criticize because I mentioned DJ company and t-shirt company and Shopify, of course. But here's the weird part of what a lot of entrepreneurs do, especially ones that have had some success. We focus almost entirely on our highlight reel. We almost never talk about our blooper reel. That is true. The more that I get to know, going back to Big Shot and these incredible people, the amount of failure that all these people have had is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And even someone like Charles Bronfman brought the Expos. Charles Bronfman brought baseball to Canada, one. He brought the Expos to Montreal, of course. But when he talks about what it was like to bring Major League Baseball to Canada, it was like 98% failure. And it just so happened that the last 2% he ended up winning, which meant he was able to get the Major League Baseball Association to convince them to come to a new country, which is very difficult. Across we've done about 15 or 16 interviews for Big Shot. Across every one of those, they talk about their successes, and then when you poke a little bit, then you get into the failures, and you realize their list of failures is way longer than the list of successes. And luckily, their successes superseded the cost of failures. Same thing for me. Between the DJ company and the t-shirt company and then Shopify, there was a poker chip company that was a complete disaster. There was a slipper company that did not work. I sold vacations for a while at a travel agency. Wasn't very good at it. So just be careful, especially those of you that are just getting started, not to focus overly on the successful stories, highlight reels of entrepreneurs. Actually, I'm going to say it again. Every successful entrepreneur I know has a past that is littered with failures. And their ability to not lose enthusiasm from one project to the next, despite the fact that the first project may have failed, that's grit. And that grit ingredient is by far the most important thing you need. You don't need to know, you don't have to have a certain IQ or EQ. You don't have to have a certain family background or certain connections. You don't have to be in some club or go to HBS or any of that stuff. You just have to have grit. Because if you can go from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm or ambition or inspiration, and you keep going, eventually it actually works. And this isn't magic. It does work. But that key ingredient for the most successful entrepreneurs that I know is unequivocally grit. And when you look across the most successful stores on Shopify today, people like Trina, have you guys heard of FIGS? They make nurse uniforms, hospital uniforms. If you go to any hospital now, the cool doctors and nurses are wearing FIGS, okay? Trina started that 10 years ago. It's now a publicly traded billion-dollar company. You look at these companies, Ben Francis with Gymshark. You look at these companies and you're astonished that they have built category leaders, billion-dollar companies in what seems like overnight. Every one of these stories was littered with failure after failure, and they just didn't care. They just kept getting up and fighting for it. And when I came onto the stage earlier and I said, these are my people, what I mean by that is we are the grit people. Entrepreneurs are the people that, when the winds of change are blowing, some people build walls and others build windmills. We are the windmill people. This city is Windmill City. It means that when we see opportunity, we take them. And the role models in our lives, at least I think so, in my life at least, when I was a kid and Dollar Days Are Mo on my wall, it wasn't that famous Michael Jordan poster with his arms out. It wasn't some rapper or some musician or some artist or some model. The poster I had on my wall was Aldo Bensadoun and Sam Bronfman and Sal Parasuco and David Bitton and and Bobby Brown, these incredible entrepreneurs. I think one of the best parts of Shopify and frankly Montreal is that we pray at the altar of entrepreneurship. And it's not this thing here where you say, oh, you're an entrepreneur, you must have not got the job at McKinsey or Deloitte or wherever. Rather, we say, amazing. I'm an entrepreneur also. And so I think that grit thing, it sounds like a fortune cookie type piece of advice. It's not. It is everything.
Harley, on behalf of the North Star team and myself personally, I just want to thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Harley Finkelstein. Thank you very much.